I'm Olga. I was born in Azerbaijan, but racially I'm an Armenian. My mom was the leader of a communist party. My dad was a space engineer, and I had a sister. So my family was born in Azerbaijan, but racially we were Armenians. And as long as those two countries existed, as long as there has been a territorial, racial, and religious conflict. And when I was about 4 years old, that conflict grew into a war.
Azerbaijan said that 150 forces in the northern part of Azerbaijan being rocket attack.
One of the first things that happened was that my mom had to take me away from the daycare because daycare couldn't provide safety. I could be killed. Every time we would walk home, my mom would squeeze my hand a little extra tight. And I remember that fear of people just looking at us. And at one point, we only had my dad that was working. And every morning, I remember watching my mom say goodbye to my dad and crying as if it was the last time that she saw him, because we didn't know whether he would be coming back home that day. That was truly our home. And after all, when is it a good time to decide that it's time to leave your home and never look back? That particular evening when my sister and I were with my grandma, and we heard a knock on our door, and we heard Azerbaijan voices behind that door commanding us to open up. My grandma put her hand over my mouth and she held it tight and she said, "Shh, please, please don't make sound." It's that fear that fills your body with the heart rate that's elevated, where you start shaking because you're just so scared of what's about to happen. And I remember feeling that we're gonna die. Then we heard our Azerbaijan neighbor walking out of her apartment and talking to Azerbaijan men and saying that we were not inside. So they said, "We're gonna come back." After waiting and waiting with hope, I think that's where hope was completely lost. This is not gonna get any better. It's gonna get worse. And if we stay, we will die. And what do you take with you when you pack your house in a rush? It's interesting because my dad took his guitar. We packed clothes in our suitcases, and we just left at night because you could hide your features as an Armenian. I remember we escaped. We locked the door of our apartment and we never looked back. And we thought, we are Armenians. Let's go and settle down in Armenia. To our surprise, we were not welcomed in Armenia, because in Armenia we were viewed as the enemies. We were Azerbaijan Armenians. After all, we grew up, we were born in Azerbaijan. We were told you would never be accepted here. So my mom and dad packed their bags, and we had some distant relatives in Ukraine, in Kiev. And I really do remember that moment where we were walking the streets of Kiev and we were knocking at people's doors with hope that they would have a room for us to rent. I remember as a child seeing the doors being opened and then someone looking up and down, seeing who we were, and then shutting it right in our faces. My grandparents escaped to Russia, a city called Volgograd. When we arrived to Volgograd, we settled down in a shed with no running water, no septic system, no heating. We slept on the floor. And I remember in school, kids reminding me daily that you should get out of here. You do not belong here. In Russia, they called us black because of the color of our hair and our eyes. And kids would tell me, "We will beat you until you become white, and it will send you where you came from." I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know where home was. I picked up some pretty heavy labels. Foreigner, refugee, unwanted, dirty, not belonging, without a home. Sorry about that. We did not talk about God growing up. Because truly, my mom was taught as a Communist Party leader that it's all lies. So I did not hear about God or church growing up in my home. We lived together with my grandma and grandpa. So there were 6 of us in that shed. And I remember that my grandma had this joy and hope about her. We were going through the same problems, but she kind of had this outlook that you'll see, things will get better. You just wait. And when I was 9 years old, I remember my grandma coming up to my mom and asking for permission to take my sister and I to a church that apparently she had been attending for a whole year at that point. And she said, this particular Sunday, it's going to be a baptism Sunday, so the girls will experience a boat ride. And I remember my mom thinking, yeah, take them on a boat ride. And that Sunday came, and my grandma woke us up early, and my sister and I, my grandma, were on the way to church. I remember first walking into that service, being completely overwhelmed by love that I sensed from all of these people. They all rushed to me like they've known me, asking me how I was doing and welcoming me, and they had this joy in their faces. And then the service started and people started singing songs. I was looking around and thinking, where am I? The difference was drastic between the hope and the love and the joy that was on these Russian people's faces within this building, and then hopelessness and darkness and hatred that I sensed outside of the doors of that church. I had so many questions, but one thing I knew, I was never welcomed this way anywhere before. I never felt more belonged, and I never felt more loved. After the church service, everyone was invited to go to a harbor and board this boat. And we would all walk out of the boat and stand around in the sand area and watch people go into the river and get baptized. I wanted that joy and that hope, and I wanted this Jesus to myself. There was three American girls that were speaking, and then one of them said, if any of you feel this weight, she didn't even finish the sentence. I remember jumping up, and I remember rushing to the front and kneeling down, and I remember crying and saying yes to Jesus. I have seen the change that happened within my family. I've seen my mom come to Christ. I've seen the radical transformation from a Communist Party leader to a devoted Christ follower, to the point where she lost her job. She was fired because she converted a whole classroom of girls to Christ. Jesus changed everything. My circumstances were still the same, but Jesus changed the way that we looked at life. We didn't care what people called us, because God Himself called us His children. It didn't matter that we were unwelcomed and foreigners and unwanted, because God Himself invited us into His own family. And it could be that we were temporary residents or refugees, but God gave us a citizenship that was purchased by the blood of the Lamb, the citizenship that will not perish or fade away, and a place to call home.